This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Books, PD products, science, fashion, and glam talk. From Bollywood to Hollywood, it's Meet and Greet with Dr. Afshan Hashmi. Every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on K4HD Radio and Talk4 TV. And here's your host, international speaker, educator, award-winning entrepreneur, and best-selling author, Dr. Afshan Hashmi.
Hello everyone, this is Dr. Afshan Hashmi with her show Meet and Greet with Dr. Afshan Hashmi. This show is syndicated worldwide to 300 million listeners. So if you give me to promote your product will be promoted in a very big way, in a very reasonable price. And friends, I want to remind you that these are my two books. The first one is The Modern Mughal Mentality, New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. And the second one is The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. These two books are available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And please go and buy these books and give me an honest review. Having said that, friends, it is very difficult to finance these shows because it requires lot of money and energy, and through the sale of these books I finance this. And if you give me sponsorship, your product will be promoted to 300 million listeners worldwide. And we are at more than 100 outlets, where it is syndicated to 300 million listeners and a very reasonable price. And before playing the sponsorship movie, I want to tell you that my email is afshan@drafshanhashmi.com and my website is www.afshanhashmi.com. Roxy, can you please play the sponsorship film? Hello everyone, this is Dr. Afshan Hashmi live from a barn country club in Virginia, and I just wanted to say that my K4HD radio and Talk4 TV show called Meet and Greet with Dr. Afshan Hashmi is syndicated worldwide and has more than 300 million listeners. And if you want these shows to continue, please give a sponsorship, and I request to please give a sponsorship because these shows require a lot of energy and money to produce. So I would request everyone to give me sponsorship, and your product will be promoted in a very reasonable price. And you can contact me at afshan@drafshanhashmi.com. Cheers and bye bye. So I want to again tell my email. It is afshan@drafshanhashmi.com. And if you write to me, I will give you a very reasonable price to promote your product in these shows. Having said that, friends, today is I'm doing a series on Havana Syndrome. And today is Let's Talk About Havana Syndrome Part 4. And I am talking from this paper here. And this paper is from Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine 2020, volume 113, and it is pages 7 to 11. And the topic is challenging the diagnosis of Havana syndrome as a novel clinical entity. So I've been talking for past several weeks about Havana syndrome. And friends, here I will be talking about the events in Cuba. Between November 2016 and June 2018, a mysterious illness was reported among 25 diplomats from the US Embassy in Havana, Cuba. Patients exhibited an array of what the State Department described as medically confirmed symptoms, including headaches, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, memory loss, confusion, disorientation, trouble walking, insomnia, sensitivity sensitivity to sound, ear pain and pressure, tinnitus, and brain abnormalities that included concussion like symptoms. And this paper is written by Robert E. Bartholomew and Robert W. Boloy from Department of History and Social Sciences, Botany College, Auckland, 2016, New Zealand, and Balo is from Department of Neurology, David Gavin School of Medicine, University of California, Los Angeles, 90095, and corresponding author is Robert E. Bartholomew. So, and airy sound accompanied most incidents. Government physicians suspected the involvement of a sonic device and consulted a specialist on the health effects of acoustic weapons. U.S. President Donald Trump, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and Senator Marco Rubio each blamed the attacks on the Cuban government in complicity with a hostile foreign actor. The incidents were confirmed to diplomats' homes and two prominent landmarks, the Hotel Capri and Hotel Nacional de Cuba. Soon after the attacks were made public on 9th August 2017, approximately 3 dozen American tourists contacted the Associated Press to report that they too had heard strange sounds and felt unwell while visiting the hotels in question over the past several years. The next month, a U.S. embassy worker and his spouse in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, were evacuated after they reported health incidents coinciding with a mysterious sound. By mid 2018, the State Department had evacuated at least 11 Americans from China after reports of similar sounds and symptoms in staff uh, at consulates in Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing. In February 2019, several Canadian diplomats and their families filed a CAD 28 million law suit against their government for neglect after they reported sounds and symptoms while in Havana. The attack claims have left experts in physics and acoustics mystified and skeptical as to how subjects located deep within a hotel or their home could be targeted. Conflicting findings and the framing of illness. U.S. Embassy staff who were exposed to a presumed sonic attack have been evaluated by two medical teams, air specialists who attributed their symptoms to inner ear vestibular damage, and head trauma specialist who found evidence of mild traumatic brain injury. Both studies were inconclusive. The trauma specialist examined 21 patients and concluded that they were suffering from concussion like symptoms and brain damage. They wrote that despite no history of head trauma, the subjects appeared to have sustained injury to widespread brain networks. However, MRI scans found non-specific white matter tract changes in some individuals but were otherwise unrevealing. Of 21 patients tested, 3 had white matter tract changes, 2 mild, 1 moderate. Such findings are common in an array of conditions from migraine and depression to normal aging. Many of the symptoms overlap with a host of medical and psychiatric conditions, and there were no structural brain changes. Furthermore, the standards for neurological impairment in the study were arbitrarily high. Any test score under the 40th percentile of normal responses, which almost certainly gave rise to false positives. Symptoms such as difficulty concentrating, brain fog, memory problems, and sleep related complaints, for example, drowsiness, insomnia, were present in nearly all patients but are also common in those with anxiety, depression, and both individual and epidemic forms of psychogenic illness. Visual problems like light sensitivity, difficulty reading, and eye strain were commonly reported, but when tested, there was no visual impairment. Impaired convergence and eye tracking found in about half the patients are common in anxious patients. Three quarters patients complained of headaches, and about half of these had sensitivity to light and sound symptoms typical of migraines. Stress is a well known trigger for migraine, which affects about 15% of the population. The study's lead author, Dr. Randall Swanson, said if you took any one of these patients and put them into a brain injury clinic and you didn't know their background, you would think they had a traumatic brain injury from being in a car accident or a blast in the military. It's like a concussion without a concussion. A key issue here is the power of physicians to shape the presentation of symptoms through suggestion, as many of these complaints are common in the general population. For example, fatigue, dizziness, headaches, memory problems, and may be reframed to reflect what doctors and government authorities are telling them. Hence, if you put these patients in a dizziness clinic, a headache clinic, a post traumatic stress disorder clinic, or an anxiety disorder clinic, there is a strong likelihood that they will be diagnosed with persistent postural perceptual dizziness, tension, or migraine headaches, post traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety disorder, respectively. The process of referring patients with non specific symptoms to a clinic specializing in brain trauma can sharp the symptoms into a specific pattern. A second study conducted by ear specialists drew an entirely different conclusion that all 25 embassy staff examined had damage to the otolith organs, which regulate balance, perception of gravity, and sense of linear motion. The study focused on 25 individuals who reported symptoms and direct exposure to either a noise or a pressure sensation, and 10 people who were with a victim at the time of an attack but did not exhibit symptoms, although one reported an extremely brief sensation of exposure to a force wave and a second heard a very brief high pitched noise for a few seconds on a single occasion. The most common symptoms was dizziness, followed by cognitive problems like difficulty concentrating, forgetfulness, taking longer to process information, and mental fogginess. 56% hearing loss and tinnitus were reported in 32% of individuals, ear pain in 28%, and headaches in 24%. On the vestibular testing of balance and eye movement, they reported an assortment of ambiguous abnormalities which without an appropriate control group are impossible to interpret and are essentially meaningless without a baseline for comparison. Inexplicably, the 10 housemates who did not report symptoms were not tested, with the exception of dizziness, which is notoriously difficult to measure. There was little symptom overlap suggestive of multiple causes. While nearly one third of individuals reported hearing loss from the attacks, a standard hearing test found loss in just two people, both of whom had hearing loss before the events in Cuba. Now, friends, I will go on a break and will be back soon.
Would you love exposure for your business, product, or service to over 300 million potential listeners? Send an email to info@talk4media.com. And now let's hear from some of our sponsors.
Chapter 2: How Jugaad leads to multi-sector success stories in India, including definitions of the Jugaad management principle business model. Of the book The Modern Mughal Mentality: New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. Inspiration. True Jugaad is an inspiration on how to create products using technology that meet the price value equation. According to a Harvard Business Review article featuring expert Prahlad and Mashelkar, most innovation programs are built on the assumptions of affluence and abundance. We see the rich and the young in both the developed and the developing countries demanding environmental friendly products and services. They also believe that affordability and sustainability are crucial to driving successful business today. New technologies and radical business models are important not only to penetrate mass markets in India but in the entire world. By reconfiguring all areas of the business structure, they will pull.
A monstrous infection is spreading worldwide. OMG, is this a simple infection or a deliberate attempt to ruin the human population? Or maybe it's bioterrorism. What is this global infection and who is spreading it? Help us find out. Go to Amazon and search for The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. The human race needs your help to make this go viral. Go to Amazon.com and read The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection to find out what happens next. Go now! The world is depending on you.
And now, back to Dr. Afshan Hashmi's radio show.
Havana Syndrome shell shock in a different cultural guise. In light of the inconclusive and contradictory findings in studies on the embassy patients and the tendency for physicians to reframe illness to reflect expectations, it is notable that most of the reported symptoms are commonly encountered by general practitioners and neurologists in their everyday practices. However, one conspicuously stands out: concussion like symptoms. During every major American conflict since the Civil War, doctors have noticed clusters of unexplained symptoms in soldiers who were exposed to the trauma of war. After undergoing thorough exams, they were unable to identify an organic cause. The presentation of neurological symptoms in these illness clusters varies to reflect the perceived wartime threat, be it artillery shells, poison gas, Agent Orange, or depleted uranium. There is a growing consensus in the psychiatric community that the fear and uncertainty that accompanies these events give rise to outbreaks of psychogenic illness, a characteristic feature of combat syndromes over the past century is the appearance of an array of neurological complaints from an overstimulated nervous system that are commonly misdiagnosed as concussions and brain damage. This is relevant to Havana syndrome because the diplomats who became sick were participants in a continuation of the Cold War, living in a hostile foreign country where they were under constant surveillance. There is a long history of embassy staff suffering harassment at the hands of Cuban agents. They soon began to hear alarming stories of sonic attacks. New staff were not only being briefed on the likelihood that they may become the next targets, they were primed for attacks as they were played recordings of the sound captured by employees in Havana before taking up their posts. Several of these recordings were later identified as the mating calls for Anerogryllus salirenictus, the Indies short trail cricket, and Gryllus assimilus, the Jamaican field cricket. As a result, between late 2016 and much of 2017, staff in Havana were living in a cold drawn of stress and uncertainty amid rumors of an enigmatic sonic weapon. As one worker who lived through this ordeal told us, they were afraid to even retire to their beds at night, fearful that they and their families would be attacked in their sleep. Shell shock posed a challenge for doctors of the day, just as the array of similar symptoms in Cuba has created modern day controversy and confusion within the medical community. During both periods, there was no dearth of opinions to explain the symptoms associated with the diagnosis. Once the JAMA team had published their findings in early 2018, there was a swift response by specialists who pointed out the psychogenic features of the outbreak. During the Great War, faced with accumulating evidence that the affected soldiers had not been subjected to exploding ordnance, some doctors continued to suggest that sufferers must have had subtle microscopic brain tears or hemorrhages that had been triggered by the blast wave. But once they had a chance to analyze the data, a consensus soon emerged that traumatic stress and suggestibility were the root of most causes. The mind had become debilitated by emotional trauma and fear. Over time, many European neurologists and psychiatrists concluded that shell shock had a psychological origin. The public health physician for the American Expeditionary Forces in France, Thomas Salmon, pointed out that soldiers' symptoms often mirrored their war experiences. This is a long standing feature and telltale sign of psychogenic illness. In some cases, soldiers developed blindness after witnessing a traumatic event or became deaf after hearing unbearable cries for help from wounded comrades. In a similar vein, contemporary mass psychogenic illness outbreaks in the general population typically reflect the exposure scenario. Persons who believe they have been exposed to tainted food commonly experience abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting, while those who think they have come into contact with toxic gas typically exhibit dizziness, itchy eyes, and breathing problems. During a press briefing in Washington, D.C. on 28 September 2017, a State Department spokeswoman, Heather Nauert, observed, "We have never seen this any place in the world before. Physicians treating these patients have made similar observations, the significance of which cannot be overstated, using terms like novel clinical entity and new syndrome characterized by concussion like symptoms." In his testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, State Department Dr. Charles B. Rosenfarb concurred that this assessment, noting that what may be a novel syndrome was proving to be a challenge to understand. What might this new syndrome be that masquerades as brain damage, and why has it not been identified before now? We believe that it has. Over the past century, soldiers returning from combat have been diagnosed with a new and novel syndrome for which no organic cause could be found. Some of the most common complaints include headache, dizziness, disorientation, forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, insomnia, chest pain, and impaired vision and hearing, all common features of Havana syndrome. However, the most conspicuous feature is the appearance of concussion like symptoms. These psychogenic symptoms associated with American soldiers living under continuous stress parallel those reported by the US diplomats working under continuous surveillance while living on foreign soil under the spectral of the Cold War. The symptoms of the American diplomats in Havana closely parallel those associated with war trauma, right down to the concussion like symptoms that often confounded physicians who have been misdiagnosed it as a brain trauma in the past. Insofar as the political and scientific evidence for the perpetration of an attack on US embassy staff in Cuba is inconclusive, we pose the question, what is the more likely that the diplomats were the target of a mysterious new weapon for which there is no concrete evidence and the use of which defies the laws of physics, or they were suffering from psychogenic symptoms generated by stress? Over the past 100 years, the medical community has accumulated a vast amount of evidence for the existence of psychogenic war trauma under an array of disparate labels. Each of these conditions uniquely reflect the times and manifest in a slightly different form to reflect the circumstances. Due to the large variation in symptoms, none of these conditions are truly syndromes. To this lengthy list, we should add another, Havana syndrome. Unfortunately, the continued framing of the outbreak as a brain injury will likely prolong recovery time, because if the patients believe they have brain damage, these negative experiments are likely to drive the nocebo effect. And now, friends, I will go on a break and will be back soon.
Would you love exposure for your business, product, or service to over 300 million potential listeners? Send an email to info@talk4media.com. And now let's hear from some of our sponsors.
A monstrous infection is spreading worldwide. Oh my God, is this a simple infection or a deliberate attempt to ruin the human population? Or maybe it's bioterrorism. What is this global infection and who is spreading it? Help us find out. Go to Amazon and search for the outbreak of a monstrous infection. The human race needs your help to make this go viral. Go to Amazon.com and read The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection to find out what happens next. Go now. The world is depending on you.
The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection, Chapter 1, 1964 to 2018, and this is the sample track, and it is read by Dr. Afshan Hashmi. In a sprawling bungalow in Potomac, Maryland, USA, lived Dr. Honey Singh, a board-certified internal medicine and family practice physician, along with his beautiful wife, Baby Singh. Baby Singh was a fashionista and was funding women's causes through her Honey Babe Foundation. She had a ladies' book club by the name of Baby's Glam and Glitzy Club, which had many glam and glitzy ladies who were professionals living in Washington, D.C., Potomac, Maryland, Virginia, and even Beverly Hills, California, as well as elites from all of America meeting at her place on the last Wednesday of every month, discussing various aspects of charities they wanted her and Dr. Honey to fund. In this club, there was a wide spectrum of career women. There were doctors, lawyers, actresses, business owners, and models, to name a few. In these book club meetings, members would come prepared after reading a book of a famous woman author, and that author was even invited from any part of the world to give her presentation, followed by a Q&A in this prestigious and elite gathering. So now, friends, I will be reading about Havana Syndrome, and there is an article in Fast Company and by Clint Rane. This article appeared on 12/28/21. This week, President Joe Biden signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act, his $768 billion defense spending bill. Buried inside is a provision that allocates some $30 million to treat Havana syndrome. Whether you read mainstream news stories or online conspiracy theories, you have likely seen mentions of this mysterious illness popping up more and more frequently. What is it? This is the $64,000 question to which even the federal government would like an answer. A seemingly increasing number of US intelligence officials and diplomats argue it's a sonic weapon of some kind that they believe is causing headaches, nausea, and other debilitating neurological symptoms to diplomats, CIA officials, and other federal employees. It is called Havana Syndrome because the first cases were reported in 2016 by US diplomats in Cuba. They started experiencing mysterious neurological symptoms mimicking what happens after a concussion but had suffered no head injury. Since then, newer answers have been reported by US military personnel based everywhere from Washington, D.C. to Moscow, Taiwan, Colombia, Uzbekistan, Austria, and China. In 2019, JAMA published a paper that studied the neuroimaging of 40 diplomats who claimed they had been exposed in Cuba. Their images showed significant brain neuroimaging differences, but the authors declared the explanation was uncertain and may require further study. Last December, another group of experts at the National Academics wrote that directed pulse radio frequency energy, basically an electric weapon, was the most plausible explanation, and it sort of stuck. Naysayers, meanwhile, argue the explanation could be exposure to pesticides, just crickets making noises, or simple mass hysteria. Proponents of the latter cause argue that though the syndrome itself may not be real, the symptoms are. One doctor has likened to it how, after phones were invented, a wave of telephone operators suddenly developed acoustic shock that they attributed to sitting so close to switchboards. Who's behind it? Some US officials are convinced Russian military intelligence is the cause, even though the evidence doesn't yet point to one particular perpetrator, and scientists can't seem to find proof that there has been an actual attack. This past November, CIA Director William Burns met with Russian intelligence officials in Moscow and reportedly warned them that if America discovers Russia is responsible, there will be consequences. What will this 30 million do? Perhaps strategically, the defense spending bill avoided using the word Havana syndrome anywhere, instead opting for anomalous health incidents or AHIs. The government loves euphemisms. Think UFOs. Still, the bill authorizes the president to appoint a senior official who will get to lead a whole of government effort to learn more about these AHIs. It also creates a Department of Defense cross functional team to coordinate the Pentagon's response. This team is also tasked with addressing the potential national security changes posed by the phenomena and ensuring officials who say they have been affected by the incidents receive adequate medical care. So this was the article, and now, friends, next Wednesday on my W4WN radio and Talk4 TV, and after that on my K4SD radio and Talk4 TV on next Thursday, I'll be talking about part 5 and 6 of Havana syndrome. So please do join that. It will be a very interesting talk. Having said that, friends, now I will ask my sound engineer Roxy to please play the sponsorship film. Hello, viewers around the globe. This is Dr. Afshan Hashmi, live for her radio show at K4HD and Talk4 TV show. And I just wanted to request you that please give me sponsorship if you want this show to continue. Having said that, friends, I will see you in another episode of K4HD Radio. plus Talk 4 TV show. And if you give me sponsorship, I will give you very reasonable price, and also you will get lot of promotion, as this show is syndicated worldwide to more than 300 million listeners. Cheers and bye bye. So, friends, please give me sponsorship, because I need a sponsorship in order for these shows to continue, because this requires lot of money and energy to prepare and produce. And these are my two books. The first one is The Modern Mughal Mentality: New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. And the second one is The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. These two books were Amazon bestsellers. So if you buy these two books, through the sale of these books, I finance these shows. So, and please give me an honest review. Having said that, please do not forget to join my shows on every Wednesday on W4WN Radio and Talk 4 TV at 7 p.m. US Eastern Time, and on Thursday at 6 p.m. US Eastern Time on K4 HD Radio and Talk 4 TV. And both these shows are syndicated to 300 million listeners. So if you give me sponsorship, your products will be promoted in a very big way. Having said that, friends, now I will sign off from this episode of K4 HD Radio and Talk 4 TV, and see you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. US Eastern Time. Cheers and bye bye.
You've been listening to Meet and Greet with Dr. Afshan Hashmi on K4HD Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in live right here every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Would you love exposure to your business, product, or service to over 300 million potential listeners? Send an email to info@talk4media.com. And remember, if you missed any part of this show or want to hear it again, find our featured show on iHeartRadio or YouTube, where all past episodes are available on demand 24/7. See you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on K4HD and Talk4 TV.